Okay, so today we're diving into a case that I know a lot of you have been asking about.
Yeah, this one's been quite popular in the inbox lately.
Yeah, you guys sent a ton of stuff on this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, Carly Gregg.
Fairly Greg. Yeah,
This is a tough one.
it really is. And I think it's one of those cases that just grabs,
Yeah,
and it's hard to let go of.
it is. It's a 14-year-old girl from Mississippi convicted of murdering her mother and attempting to murder her stepfather.
And when you see a case with such a young perpetrator, it always raises so many questions, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't help but wonder what could drive someone so young to such a dark place.
Yeah, what kind of forces could lead to such a horrific outcome?
Right. And that's really what we're here to explore today, to try to make sense of this senseless act.
To sift through the evidence and the psychology and try to understand the why behind the what.
Exactly. And we've got a lot of ground to cover. So let's start by setting the scene. We need to understand the world Carly was living in before the tragedy. The material you guys sent paints a pretty bleak picture of her early life.
Yeah, her childhood was definitely marked by a lot of adversity.
We're talking loss of a younger sister, parents' divorce when she was just a little girl, and a father struggling with drug addiction.
That's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone a child.
Absolutely. And these early experiences can have a lasting impact.
Oh, absolutely. These are what we call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and they can really shape a person's development.
So we're already seeing a foundation of instability and trauma in Carly's life.
Right, it's like a house built on sand.
And as she enters adolescence, things seem to take an even darker turn.
Right, we see this escalation of behavioral issues.
Drug use, bringing a knife to school,
Yeah.
self-harm.
It's like she's crying out for help.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking.
It is, and it underscores the importance of early intervention.
Of recognizing those signs of distress and getting young people the help they need. And thankfully, in Carly's case, her mother did recognize the need for help and took her to see a therapist.
Rebecca Kerr.
Rebecca Kirk, right?
And she diagnoses Carly with major depressive disorder and adjustment disorder.
But here's where things get really interesting. Rebecca notes that Carly showed no signs of homicidal or suicidal tendencies.
Right, and that's a crucial detail because it throws a wrench into our understanding of what happens next.
Yeah, it's like if the therapist didn't see this coming, how can we possibly make sense of it?
Right.
Fast forward to March 19th, 2024, a seemingly ordinary day that explodes into violence.
It starts with Carly's mother, Ashley, discovering vape pens in Carly's room.
Evidence of her daughter's ongoing drug use.
And this leads to an argument.
And things escalate quickly from there.
Now, thankfully, we have the security footage from the kitchen to give us some insight into what happened.
And this footage has been analyzed extensively by experts, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a key piece of the puzzle.
So what does it show us? What can we glean from those chilling images?
Well, firstly, you can see Carly's demeanor before and after the murder.
And from what I've seen in the material you sent, it's not pretty.
No, it's pretty disturbing. There's this coldness, a
Hey.
detachment that's really unsettling.
And then there's the deliberate way she hides the gun behind her back
Right.
while on camera.
Right, like she's aware of the cameras and trying to conceal the evidence.
That's chilling.
And then there's the audio. You can hear Ashley's screams, and then Carly starts to sing.
Oh, God, that's awful.
It's like she's trying to cover up the sounds of the murder.
Like she's detached from the reality of what she's just done.
Exactly. And then shortly after this, Carly's friend, she's referred to as BW in court documents, she arrives at the house
And Carly lets her in.
and shows her Ashley's body.
She shows her the body.
Calmly shows her the body,
My God.
and then reveals her plan to kill her stepfather, Heath Smiley, when he gets home.
So she's confiding in her friend about the murder and her intention to kill Heath.
Yeah, it's a strange and disturbing dynamic between these two girls.
And what's her friend's reaction to all of this?
Shockingly, she seems to go along with it. She waits in the backyard while Heath arrives.
And when he enters the house,
Carly shoots him.
this is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it raises a whole other set of questions about BW's role in all of this.
Was she genuinely scared, or was there something more to their relationship?
We may never know for sure,
And then, of course, there's the chilling 911 call made by Heath after he's shot.
which I'm sure we'll hear about in excruciating detail during the trial.
Yeah, that's going to be tough to listen to.
It is.
But somehow he survives the shooting. Carly flees with BW, and the long road to trial begins.
And that trial is where the real battle of narratives begins.
Right, because now we have the defense arguing not guilty by reason of insanity.
Essentially claiming that Carly's mental state at the time of the murders prevented her from understanding the nature and consequences of her actions.
So they're saying she wasn't in control of her own mind,
Exactly.
that her actions were driven by a mental illness that rendered her incapable of distinguishing right from wrong.
Right. And to support their claim, they bring in a psychiatrist who diagnoses Carly with bipolar disorder,
Bipolar disorder.
arguing that she experienced a psychotic break during the murders.
So they're painting a picture of a troubled teenager who was essentially a victim of her own broken mind.
Yes. But the prosecution presents a very different picture of Carly.
Oh, really?
They argue that she was manipulative, narcissistic, and fully aware of her actions.
Oh, wow. So they're saying she knew exactly what she was doing.
Exactly. And they point to entries in her journal that seem to support this view. Entries where she talks about being evil and embracing fire for its destructive power.
It's a stark contrast.
Yeah.
On one hand, we have the fragile teenager overwhelmed by mental illness.
And on the other, we have a calculating individual who planned and executed these horrific crimes.
So the jury is left to grapple with these competing narratives to decide which version of Carly they believe.
Right.
But before we get to the verdict, there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to examine.
The enigmatic figure of Heath Smiley.
The stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
His role in this case has sparked a lot of speculation.
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of unanswered questions surrounding Heath.
So what exactly is it about his behavior that has people raising eyebrows?
Well, firstly, there's his seemingly emotionless reaction to his wife's murder.
You'd think someone would be visibly distraught after experiencing such a traumatic event.
You would, but witnesses describe him as detached and unemotional during the trial.
That's definitely strange.
It is. And then there's the incident with the security footage.
Right, I remember reading about that.
Heath claims to have found cameras that the police missed,
Okay.
but the way he handled the footage, transferring it from an SD card to his computer before turning it over, raised suspicions of tampering.
That does sound a bit suspicious.
It does. While investigators ultimately cleared him of any wrongdoing, it remains a point of contention for those who believe he was somehow involved.
Yeah, it's hard to shake that feeling that something's not quite right.
Exactly. And let's not forget that bizarre I love you gesture he makes to Carly during the trial. Oh my God, that was so creepy.
It was. It's hard to interpret that as anything other than deeply inappropriate and unsettling.
It feeds into the theory that there was something more going on between them.
Right, something that may have contributed to the events of that day.
So we have this complex and troubling tapestry of factors at play. A teenager with a traumatic past evidence suggesting both mental breakdown and calculated premeditation, and a stepfather whose actions raise more questions than answers.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. Where do we go from here?
Well, the jury reaches a verdict, and Carly's conviction raises even more questions about the nature of truth justice and the challenges of discerning guilt in a case as complicated as this one.
Oh.
But we'll delve into that in part 2 of our deep dives.
I can't wait.
It's a wild ride.
Okay, folks, stay tuned for part 2, where we'll unpack the trial, the verdict, and the lingering questions that continue to haunt this case.
So the jury, they deliberated.
Okay.
And it was only for a few hours.
A few hours. Wow, that
Yeah.
seems pretty quick considering the
fine.
gravity of the case,
Oh.
especially with all the conflicting information they had to sort through.
So what did they decide?
Guilty on all charges.
Wow.
Yeah. Carly Gregg, at just 14 years old,
14.
was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Life in prison without parole.
For a teenager, it's a tough sentence.
That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry, let alone a child. What was the reaction from the defense team?
They weren't ready to give up. They filed a motion for a new trial.
Okay, what were their grounds for appeal?
They argued that some crucial evidence had come to light after the trial.
Oh, really?
Mm.
This is where it gets interesting. What kind of evidence could potentially overturn a conviction like this?
Well, this is where Carly's biological father, Kevin Gregg, comes into play.
Okay.
He gave this bombshell interview,
Okay.
claiming that Carly had a history of hallucinations going all the way back to her childhood.
So now we're talking about potentially undiagnosed, even more severe mental health issues than were presented at trial.
Right, and if this is true,
Yeah.
it could change everything.
Did the court take Kevin's claims seriously?
Initially, yeah, they did. The possibility of these previously undisclosed issues, it's something you can't just ignore.
Of course. But were they able to substantiate these claims?
That's where things fall apart.
Huh.
A closer look at the interview transcript,
Okay.
including some portions that weren't aired, revealed that his statements about Carly's childhood hallucinations, they were fabricated.
Wow, so he essentially made it all up.
It seems that way.
That's a huge blow to the defense's case. Did they have any other grounds for appeal, or was that the end of the road for Carly?
They tried to raise other points, but ultimately they were unsuccessful. The judge denied the motion for a retrial.
So Carly was left to face the reality of a life sentence.
Yeah, a life sentence at 14. It's hard to comprehend.
It is, and it's hard not to feel a sense of unease, even if she did commit these horrific acts.
Right, because you're talking about
Yeah,
a child who's essentially being punished for the rest of her life.
and this is where the conversation gets really complicated, because even with the father's testimony debunked, even with the guilty verdict, there are still so many lingering questions.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
There are people who believe that Carly was this manipulative mastermind,
Right.
that she planned these murders and expertly played the mental illness card.
It's easy to see how someone might reach that conclusion. Her behavior during the trial, those journal entries about embracing evil, it all paints a disturbing picture.
Right, and you can't ignore those details.
But then there's the other side of the coin, those who believe that she was truly experiencing a mental breakdown, that her actions, however horrific, were driven by an illness she couldn't control.
And that's the real dilemma of this case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because how do you reconcile those two seemingly opposite versions of Carly?
It's like a moral and legal puzzle with no easy answers.
Right, and I think that's what makes this case so fascinating and so disturbing. It forces us to confront our own biases, our understanding of mental health, and the limits of our justice system.
It really challenges our assumptions about guilt, innocence, and the very nature of truth.
Exactly.
And speaking of unanswered questions, we can't ignore the lingering suspicion surrounding Heath Smiley.
Oh no, Heath. He can't escape scrutiny.
Right. I mean, his behavior throughout this whole ordeal has been truly bizarre. The lack of emotional response, the security camera incident, his insistence on staying in contact with Carly while she's in prison, despite a no-contact order. It's just strange.
There's definitely a cloud of suspicion hanging over him.
Even if we give him the benefit of the doubt that "I love you" gesture during the trial was just plain creepy.
Yeah, it was incredibly inappropriate and adds fuel to the fire of suspicion.
It makes you wonder what was really going on in that house.
We may never know the full truth.
So we're left with this unsettling tableau. A stepfather with questionable motives, a teenage stepdaughter capable of unthinkable violence, and a mother who tragically lost her life in the crossfire.
It's like a modern-day Greek tragedy where everyone is both a victim and a perpetrator.
What are we to make of all of this? Is there any way to find resolution in a case so shrouded in mystery and unanswered questions?
I think that's the challenge. We have the facts of the case, the court's verdict, but the why, the true motivations behind Carly's actions, and the potential role of Heath Smiley, it remains elusive.
It's a puzzle with missing pieces, and we're left to fill in the blanks with our own interpretations and assumptions.
And that's often the case with these true crime stories, right?
Right. It's what keeps us coming back for more.
The desire to understand, to make sense of the senseless.
To grapple with the darkness and search for some semblance of light.
Exactly.
We've really gone deep on this one.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of details, lots of twists and turns.
Yeah, this case, it's really got it all, doesn't it?
It does, and I think it's time to step back a bit. Look at the bigger picture. What are the broader implications of a case like this?
Yeah. What can we learn from all this?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is the limitations of mental health assessments. We talked about how Carly's therapist didn't see this coming.
Right, she didn't detect any homicidal or suicidal tendencies.
Exactly. And that raises the question, how much can we really predict when it comes to human behavior?
Especially with teenagers.
Especially with teenagers. Their brains are still developing. Their emotions are all over the place.
It's a volatile time.
It is. And even with the best diagnostic tools and expertise,
Yeah.
there's always a margin of error.
So even if we had all the information, even if we could peer into someone's mind,
Right.
we still couldn't say for certain what they might do.
Exactly. Human behavior, it's just too complex.
It's unpredictable.
It is.
And this case also really highlights the challenges our justice system faces when dealing with mental illness.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Our system is built on this idea of guilt and innocence,
Right.
of intent and premeditation.
But what happens when mental illness clouds those issues?
Right. How do you determine punishment when someone's actions may have been driven by a force beyond their control?
It's a tough question. And I don't think there are any easy answers.
No, there aren't.
It makes you wonder if there should be alternative pathways for dealing with cases like Carly's. Pathways that prioritize treatment and rehabilitation alongside accountability.
I think that's a conversation we need to have as a society. How do we balance the need for justice with the complexities of mental health?
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
After all the unpacking and analyzing and debating, what's the takeaway? for our listeners? What should they be thinking about after they finish this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that truth can be elusive, especially when it comes to human behavior. We like to think we can categorize people as good or bad,
Right.
guilty or
But
innocent.
real life is much more nuanced than that.
It is. And the Carly Gregg case is a perfect example of that. There are elements that point to premeditation, to cold-blooded calculation. But then there are also signs of mental distress, of a young girl struggling with forces she couldn't understand.
And ultimately, we're left with this unsettling ambiguity.
Right. And I think that's okay.
It's okay to not have all the answers.
It is. It's okay to sit with the discomfort of uncertainty. We don't always need to tie things up in a neat little bow.
This case, it's a reminder that the human experience is messy.
It is.
It's complicated.
It is. And sometimes the most important thing is to just keep asking questions.
To keep exploring, to keep trying to understand.
Exactly.
Well, folks, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the Carly Gregg case. It's been a long and winding road, and I think we've all learned a lot along the way.
Yeah, I think so.
If you're still grappling with questions, if you have thoughts you want to share, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We love hearing from you.
We do. And if you have another case, another mystery that's been keeping you up at night,
Yeah,
send us your stack.
we're always ready for another deep dive. Okay, folks, until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep those stacks coming.